Hello. It's so good to be with you here tonight, especially as we're journeying through the story of Moses. No figure is greater in the Hebrew Bible, and certainly in the Jewish tradition. Tonight, I'm looking with you at the death of Moses, which is described in Deuteronomy chapter 34. After spending all of chapter 33 blessing Israel, chapter 34 begins with Moses going up on top of a mountain. And God shows Moses all of the land, but says, you will never cross over there. Given that the whole of Deuteronomy is pretty dense, chapter 34 is fairly straightforward. Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command. He was buried in a valley, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And so this whole story of Moses ends in a fairly calm way. And I gotta tell you, I have some questions about that. I mean, seriously? Moses dies and there's no dialogue around it? After 4 chapters of dialogue, this is the end? And so I did what someone with questions might do. I took them to my friend, who's a rabbi. One of the great joys of my work as college chaplain at Muhlenberg College. Thank you, go Mules. Muhlenberg is in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and is one of our 26 ELCA colleges and universities. And one of my great joys in serving as chaplain there is that we have a full-time rabbi on our religious life staff. 28% of Muhlenberg students are Jewish, and we celebrate daily our life together as a multi-faith community. And so I asked our rabbi and some of our Jewish students if they would sit down and talk with me about the death of Moses. And their response was, yes, Pastor Kristen, we'd love to do that. We just need you to find a 4-hour block of time. They said, we can't possibly talk about this in an hour. So I don't want you 7-minute people to be worried, because I'm going to give you a very redacted version of that conversation. I need to tell you about the Midrash. The Midrash is the ancient rabbinic commentary on the Torah, and it tells the story of the death of Moses quite differently than Deuteronomy. Rabbi George Gittleman writes, when Moses realized that the decree of death had been sealed against him, he drew a small circle around himself, stood in it, and said, Master of the universe, I will not budge from here until you void that decree. At the same time, he put on a sackcloth, wrapped himself in it, and strewed ashes upon himself, and persisted in prayer and supplication before the Holy One. Even so, Moses must go the way of all humans. He must die. But Moses, he's not going out like that. So in the Midrash, he takes his case to creation. Moses implores the stars and the planets. He begs the sea, which you remember he once commanded. And he asks the mountains and the trees if they can stop this. But it's to no avail. And in the Midrash, it is God who mourns. In the Midrash, God invites the angels to go and collect Moses, and one by one they refuse because they are too angry. Until finally, like the Deathly Hallows, the angel of death agrees. And because everyone is so distraught, God comes God's self to bury Moses. And God weeps alone. This is no passive death. This, to me, seems like the real reaction to the disruption of death. The midrash is something I can grab onto, 4 hours indeed. This is how we respond to disruption. In the rabbinic tradition, the midrash is the bridge between the Torah and actual, real life. When my husband, Javier, died 538 days ago, at the age of 42, I was in France at the Taizé community, planning a trip for college students. I emailed him when I got there, and he called me right away, and I will never forget what he said when I answered the phone. Yay, it worked. And so our last conversation was perfectly ordinary. I told him about the travel to France, and he told me what he had for lunch that day, which is what he always did. I told Javier I was pretty sure my phone wouldn't work at Taizé, and that I would talk to him in a few days when I got to Perez. We then said goodbye for what would be the last time. In a way, in my head, it's the Deuteronomy 34 version. There was nothing dramatic about it. There was just jet lag, a phone with minimal service, and tales of a turkey sandwich. And so thanks be to God for the midrash, because the commentary, the aftermath, the reality is disruptive. In the aftermath, I am Moses, drawing a circle around myself and saying, I will not budge from here until you remove this decree. The thing about disruption is we can't plan for it. And we all have it in our lives and in the lives of those whom we tend in our ministry. And there are so many other things I want to tell you about Javier, because there are so many more important days in his life than the day that he died. I actually think about that as the least important day of his life, but on that day, my life was rebooted. When Javier died, Javier's wife also died. Neither one of us gets to journey to the promised land that we thought was ahead in our marriage. And yet, Kristen is alive. And so what do we do with all of this? How do we help our people as they face disruption? How do we help them move through the reality of the midrash? In his book, The Advantage, Patrick Lencioni identifies critical questions that leaders can ask to give people the clarity they need as they navigate disruption. I want to share some of those with you and suggest that these are the questions that we as church might also ask as we seek to accompany our people through disruption in a real way. The questions are Patrick's, and the answers are mine, as filtered through my lens as a person who is a widow and a pastor. And the first question is, why do we exist? Who is the we? The church. And we know that the church exists to proclaim the gospel, to show people the love of Jesus Christ in the world. The inbreaking of God through the incarnation of Jesus is into the world that we have, not the world we wish that we have. And so we receive people as church in the middle of their disruptions, as they are, because that's how God receives all of us. The newness that comes from death and disruption, it's not idyllic, it's new. And new life comes again with all of the growth and development stages in ways that are not the same as before. It's hard. And so the image that you're looking at is of Ascension Chapel at Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. That's where I served for 6 years as college chaplain. and Javier's alma mater, and where his funeral was held. The Ascension of Jesus, I think, might be thought of as the original Left Behind series. It begs the question, and really this window begs this question: why are you looking up? Look out into the world. The church exists to be the body of Christ, active and alive in the world, and miracles happen because people do them. We exist to look out and to call people's attention to where God is in the world, in the middle of the disruptions. And so as church, we journey alongside of our people in the newness of the resurrection. The next question is, how do we behave? And my answer is, we acknowledge. Always, as professionals with boundaries, we are balancing our need to share versus our people's need to know. So I don't lead every conversation in my ministry talking about Javier's death, but I have to say it comes up a lot. As soon as I got back to work 10 days after the death of my husband, and I want to point out what a privilege it was to have 10 days. Most workplaces give 2 days, if that. As soon as I got back, I met with my 16-person college student leadership team and said to them, openly weeping, I don't know how to be your pastor without showing you how sad that I am about the death of Javier. And I want you to know that it is okay to talk about him and to ask me questions and to say his name. And that's what they did all year long. They even suggested that we would add to our weekly meeting a segment called WWJD, What Would Hav Do? And I was so grateful for them and for getting to be their pastor as I really am. I also interviewed for my new call at Muhlenberg 8 months after Javier's death. And I talked about it during my interview. Often people will say to me, I'm sorry, I don't want to upset you. To which my response is, the upsetting thing is already done. There is nothing you could do to upset me anymore. You don't have that much power. Megan Devine's book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, was published in 2018 and has been a very helpful resource for me. Megan is a licensed psychotherapist who watched her partner drown in front of her when he was 38. She writes, I want us to stop naming our natural healthy responses to grief as unhealthy or pathological. When we don't talk about what is normal and healthy, people experiencing something normal and healthy think they're crazy. In Harry Potter, Order of the Phoenix, the 5th book in the series by J.K. Rowling, Harry first notices the strange skeletal horses pulling the carriages up to Hogwarts. And since his first year, Harry, like almost everyone else around him, believes the carriages are pulled by magic. When he sees the creatures and is freaked out, his friends think he's crazy. And then we meet Luna Lovegood. And she says, you're not going mad or anything. I can see them too, Harry. You're just as sane as I am. They're called thestrals. And Harry asks, why can't the others see them? Because, says Luna, they can only be seen by people who've seen death. Once we have seen death, we can see thestrals. And the thing about thestrals is we never know who can see them. The thestral seers and the non-thestral seers live together all the time. In my own life and ministry, so many people now have revealed to me that they see thestrals, and many of them were students that I had known for a long time. And I first felt so bad that I didn't know these things about my people. But here's the thing about thestral seers. We know that you can only see them when you see them. I know that many of you can see them too. And so this piece about acknowledgement is what we do as church. It is both radical and disruptive to claim that you can see thestrals, and equally radical and disruptive, to acknowledge that you see and hear someone in the middle of their life, even if you can't see what they see and hear what they hear. And the final question is, how will we succeed? How do we help ourselves and our people survive disruption? So let me introduce you to my dog, Grange. Grange was named by Javier for his copper-colored head after Red Grange, the first American football player of major significance, who in the 1920s came from Javier's hometown of Wheaton, Illinois, went on to great football success at the University of Illinois, and became an original Chicago Bear. And that represents about all I know about football. Now ask me about the Kardashians and I'll say, okay, but we need 4 hours. I digress. Grange is a very fancy sounding breed of dog called a Treen Walker Coonhound. And Javier and I were lucky enough to get him from the Humane Society. Let me tell you about a Treen Walker Coonhound. They are bred to chase small game, like raccoons and squirrels, up a tree, and then bay and howl and bark as loud as they can until the hunter arrives. Grange can track a small animal for 100 miles. Spoiler alert, I am not a hunter. Neither was Javier. We learned quickly the best thing to do with Grange is to let him tree something and then congratulate him, good boy, and then we can move on. Otherwise, we're getting dragged. After Jav died, it was me and Grange together. And he is not the dog I would have ever chosen to have by myself. And yet many a time, that dog licked me back to life when I was on the floor in a disintegrated mess in the ash heap of Moses' midrash. 2 months after Javier died, Grange got an injury, and he was to have no walks, no stairs, no jumping, no squirrels. Nearly impossible. Many a day in this journey of new life, I have wondered simply, how am I going to do it? How am I going to get up and out of bed and go out into the world? Nearly impossible. But my answer came from Grange. Because inevitably, when I would let him outside with his hurt leg, every third or fourth time, his nemesis, the rabbit family, would be there in our backyard. And Grange, with his injured leg, would take off after those rabbits as fast as he could in order to try to chase them up a tree. And on those days when I wondered, or when I still wonder, how am I going to survive? I remember Grange, physically in pain, hopping on 3 legs, bolting out the back door as fast as he can, chasing rabbits because that is what he was born to do. And sometimes all you can do is what you're born to do. That's how we survive. In the middle of disruption and as disruptors, we get to ask ourselves and our people, what do you like? What are you good at? What's important to you? And who needs you to do those things? What are you born to do? Those are the classic questions of vocation in the Lutheran tradition. And when we need to navigate life through chaos, we can ask those questions. And we can also remember Grange chasing rabbits. Of course, he's now moved beyond rabbits, as there are fox in our new neighborhood in Pennsylvania. Stay tuned. We'll see how that ends. These questions, when answered by the church, begin to sound like charisms or markers of the church. I think that they help us accompany our people in times of disruption. And finally, our last picture. A word from Hav, in the spirit of WWJD. Javier Perez Jr., a first-generation American, bilingual person, faithful Roman Catholic, Lutheran college graduate, was also incredibly proud to be the husband of an ELCA pastor. And he would also remind me often of what a great privilege it was to hold that role. And I'm going to extend that to all of us here who hold the great responsibility of modeling for our people accompaniment through disruption. When I didn't know what to do in a particular situation in my ministry or anywhere in life, he would say to me, "Kristen, remember, perception is reality." In other words, when we don't know what to do, we can sometimes fake it till we make it. Because as I say in almost every sermon to college students, the struggle is real. I believe you. Things are hard. So you don't have to have everything figured out. You just need to do the next thing. Do what you know how to do. And that, in fact, might be the definition of liturgy. Something that forms us in ways we don't even know just by practicing it over and over. Other times when I would complain that someone had misconstrued something that I said or didn't understand me, Hav would say, "Kristen, remember, perception is reality." And he would remind me that no matter what my intent was, if it was perceived as exclusive or dismissive or hostile, then it was. And even if that wasn't fair and systems were in place that I didn't create, it was my job to actively work to dismantle that perception, not by talking more, a particular challenge for me, but by collaborating more, inviting more, listening more, advocating more, being present more. And it is this idea, perception is reality, that has fundamentally shaped my work as a pastor and a college chaplain. And so thanks be to Hav for his daily dose of practical theology. Thank you to you for receiving my story and for the ways in which you accompany those in your world through the disruption of the gospel, the reality of the Midrash, and the new life of the resurrection.